I wanted to ask you: is there any way to determine from an autopsy, Barbara, what type of knife? And I think we went into this on the last show. But is there a way to detect either the similar type knife or through that medical, through the autopsy? Is there a way to tell what type of weapon was used, Barbara?
Sure, and we went into this extensively on the last show I did with you. The knives are either single edged or double edged. There are different shapes. There are some that curve to a point. There are others that are rounded at the edge. There are some that have a hilt that can leave a mark when it strikes the skin. You can tell the length of a knife, the width, how many edges. What would they used to call that knife? The 007, I think. It was
the gravity knife. Yeah.
Yeah. There's triangle-shaped blades that have 3 sharp edges. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of knives.
So how do you tell from the exam what kind of knife? Is there a science to that, Barbara?
Sure. The skin has little muscles in it. It has a certain tensile strength that holds it together. When you cut through the skin, there's a separation, and now there's a gaping. The flesh is now open. Excuse me. So in order to detect the shape of the knife, you reapproximate the edges of the wound. You bring them back together, and that gives you the width of the knife. That tells you where the sharp edge was. You measure the depth of the puncture. Now, don't forget, depending on how much force, you can, say, in soft tissues like the abdomen, you could push in further than the depth and the actual length of the knife. But the pathologist very carefully measures all of these things and compares them and comes up with an approximation of what kind of knife they believe it could be.
Mm-hmm. Can they tell who was murdered first out of these 4, Barbara, based on autopsy?
Ed and I had talked about that last time. Mm-hmm. And Ed made a terrific point, which was that, the Locard's principle of transference, if the first person is stabbed, there's blood on the knife. You go to the second person, you're now carrying the blood of the first victim to the second person. You go to the third person. Now you have 1 and 2, victims number 1 and 2. So you're transferring blood with each and every victim. So yes, a good detective, a good medical examiner, a good crime scene technician could tell you which victims and in what order, depending on that, the transfer of blood.
So potentially they could have who was killed first in this quadruple murder, and based on the science. And I have said it all along, so is Ed, and so did, I think, Bill. I think we all 4 agree that this case is going to be solved with the science.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have some questions, if you don't mind. I'll rapid fire them because we've answered some of them. Bill, I'm not paying you overtime, so you just got to hang out with us. I got a quick question for you, Ed, on this thing about the crime scene, and then I'm glad that you brought that up, because here's a question from Livy 5. She says, in a crime scene where we know that there was no forced entry, that we know that from the police. The police told us there was no sign of forced entry. In a crime like this, in a crime scene like this, Ed, where there's 4 murders and no forced entry, right? Do you work the crime scene, and this is a great question, from the inside out or the outside in? And you are an expert. You've been on over 2,500. You processed over 2,500 crime scenes in your time. We need to get your answer on that one, Ed, because this one was highlighted.
See, usually if there's a forced entry, I start from the outside in. And if there's no forced entry, as in the case that the perpetrator was already inside, and maybe known to the victims or at a party, and then something wrong, I work from the inside out. But in any event, I'm looking for egress and how did they get in and how did they get out? Okay. And then once they got out, where did they go? So I'm going to do both inside and outside. It just depends. Like I said, if there's forced entry, I'm starting from the outside, working my way in. Yeah. But and I want to follow that trail. I want to go in, I want to see how did they get in, what were their interactions, what were their movements throughout the crime scene, and how did they exit the crime scene, and where did they go from there? So I want to document and search for and look for evidence in all these areas.
Yeah, I want tire tracks, footprints, everything.
Exactly.
But Ed, isn't there a spiral search method which deals with where the most evidence is, and you do a spiral search in an outward fashion from where the most evidence is? Isn't that a common crime scene procedure?
That is a search method, and in fact, I have the latest edition of my book, and it's in here. But it's usually done for underwater crime scenes, as opposed to like inside of a house or outside. It can be done outside in an open field, and then you drop what we call a datum point in the middle of a field, and then you attach a line to it, and then you just walk out and slowly increase your circle as you go out, searching in that fashion. Yes, that is an acceptable method of crime scene searches, but typically not done indoors.
Fascinating. Hey, I want to say thank you to Liz Gaspari. Yes. Thank you for becoming a new member. She's the Gaspari Nutrition. She also gifted 5 memberships. So thank you for that. Brent Montgomery sent in $10 to help for Bill's overtime. He's not getting paid overtime. That'll go to Barbara. That'll go to Barbara and Ed.
I get a lot more than $10 an hour.
Yeah, geez, but
When
that's
I retired, I was making over $100 an hour.
Hey, Cannon, it's Christmas time. Leave the guy alone. Thank you, Brent Montgomery. Truca Girl 11 sends in a $10 super chat and says, hopefully they got what they needed in the beginning, or sadly the inconsistency. The insistent family members may have inadvertently contaminated the crime scene. Thank you all, your distinguished guests. Thank you for that. Hey, before we move on to our next part, I wrote down because I was trying to search for it on the video, but I don't got time for that. So Kaylee's father said that his sister, this is coming from the dad, he says that the coroner told the sister, stated it was gouges and that the liver was perforated, like I said, and lungs were punctured. They were told this by the coroner, and that he actually put that out himself. And then he has his attorney, the attorney Shannon Gray, also confirmed that. But I also did a little more research, and the coroner's office, the Latah County coroner's office, denied that was put out there. So that's where the controversy comes into play here. I don't know if that's like a liability thing or they're just backpedaling on it. But at the end of the day, I think our stand is clear on it. It's not something that you should do. Again, they haven't handled many death scenes, right? This is not a place where people are getting killed left and right. So this comes from inexperience, I believe.
Yeah.
She's a coroner. She's not a medical examiner. And again, people in the chat are still confused about this here. Jay Lamb, Dr. Bodden says Mabed is a coroner, not a medical. We know this. We know.
Yeah.
Now.
And she was a former nurse. Now, the thing is, too, did she go to these scenes, or does she have a coroner's death investigator that went to the scene?
She said she went to the scene. She
didn't go until 5:30.
Okay.
She said she went to the scene, but she waited many, many hours to go. And when asked why, she said, well, I just was letting the police get their work done. Jesus, Ed, have you ever seen,
No.
As soon as I had a case, I'd jump right on it. I'm there with crime scene. I'm there with the police. We work together. We work with each other, for each other. And we bounce ideas and work off each other.
I didn't leave the office without first calling your office and saying, hey, guys, are you responding?
Yeah.
And we'll meet up there. Because in our jurisdiction and in many jurisdictions across the nation, the body is the jurisdiction of the medical examiner, the coroner, not the police.
Right. Okay. And I would never move a body or do anything until crime scene was right there with me, so we could do everything together, do our photos together, and crime scene wouldn't move the body until I got there.
Right. And how many times did you wait patiently for us because we couldn't go in without a warrant? But you could. Right. You could have went in and did your work, but you didn't. You waited for us. We got the warrant. We went in and worked the bodies together.
Yeah. Barbara, and I can't imagine why she wouldn't want to go in there and
Yeah, from the notification of 12 noonish, 12:30 to 5:30. That's an awful long time.
That's a long.
Angela Ang sends in a super chat, $20. Thank you, Ange. Barbara and Ed, if the perp got cut and left a drop of blood in the pool of the victim's blood, can they isolate that, or would it be too diluted? Thank you, Ange.
Gee, I figure, Ange, you have to ask the toughest question, wouldn't she? Thanks, Ange.
I don't think it'd be diluted, but it would be mixture.
Yeah, it would be. It would show up, but you know, when you sample a blood pool, you take a swab, you streak across it this way, that way, and you may miss that little particular drop or two of blood. If you had the entirety of the blood pool and submitted it for DNA analysis on that microscopic level, of course you will see the two types of blood, but it's all in the sampling.